Alright, hello everyone and welcome to part 2 of 3D printing news.
We have to interrupt our previously scheduled content for some breaking news. Apparently, Creality has just come out with their response to the H2D. So as you can see here, this looks like a dual print head machine with a clear acrylic plastic case on the front. You can clearly see there's two print heads here. So it looks like Creality is copying Bambu Lab yet again and making their own dual extruder machine. And they've already got renders of it. This is from a leaked presentation. If we take a close look, we can see some details. Up at the top, you can see two streams of different colored filament going in. And off to the side here, this looks like a lever for filament cutting. And it's got a linear rail for the x-axis on the motion system. I think this is kind of surprising to most people that Creality already has a solution lined up as a competitor to the H2D as soon as it's come out. The nice thing about Creality is they're not going to go on some silly side quest to try to stick a laser on this machine. At least I hope not, because that would be probably a huge waste of time. This isn't Creality's first attempt at a dual print head machine. If we take a look over here, this is the Sermoon D3 Pro. I've seen this at trade shows before, and it seemed like it was more geared towards a professional audience. The main application here being the soluble support material. So you can print more complex geometry and not have to worry about support material removal. And here's an illustration of the D3 Pro's dual nozzle mechanism. It looks pretty much exactly the same as how the Bambu Lab H2D works, except this is the older revision of the machine. You can tell because it looks like they're using linear rods, these hardened steel rods, to carry the print head, versus on this newly leaked image, they're using a linear rail. And all of the stuff on the inside looks newer, more compact, and cleaner. So it looks like Creality is catching up to Bambu Lab. They must have had some kind of mole inside of Bambu Lab where they're, extracting information and feeding it to Creality, because there's no way they came up with this in, 7 days or whatever it's been since the H2D was launched. I have a feeling they knew what was going on inside of Bambu Lab's secret volcano lair, where they were busy attaching sharks with frickin' lasers to the heads of their 3D printers. But yeah, that's pretty interesting, and we have another story that just rolled in at the last minute about, allegedly, this is all alleged, I don't know the real story about what happened here, but this guy on the 3D printing Reddit is saying that he lost everything in a fire started by his 3D printer. And, this is just an awful sight. Looks like his whole house burnt down, essentially. And we're going to go ahead and read through this story. This guy's claiming that it was caused by a Cheaty printer. So, I was just permanently banned from r/CheatyTech3D subreddit after commenting about how my family lost everything when the +4 I had caught on fire. There are multiple reports of boards starting to smoke and melt. They were lucky because they had a warning before theirs run up in flames. My +4 has the new SSR, which is a solid-state relay. It's the component that's used to turn the heat bed on and off using AC power. Another fire hazard that wasn't handled correctly, though that shouldn't have mattered anyway, as I only printed PETG, so I never used the chamber heater. Okay, so I guess there's multiple SSRs. One of them might be used to power the chamber heater, another might be used to power the heated bed. I was home at the time, I checked the printer, no sign of issues. 15 to 30 minutes after my last check, my fire alarms are going off. I run over and smoke is billowing out the top, and flames are coming out of the rear panel. It went 0 to 60 real quick. Rather than reaching out first for more info or publicly asking me to reach out, they first permanently banned me from the subreddit. Not the correct way to handle a potential safety issue. Here's the thing. What did it take for them to actually address the SSR issue? If I recall correctly, it wasn't until a prominent YouTuber brought up the concerns and stated that he wouldn't recommend their printers as long as there was a fire hazard. Ooh, that might have been me. It might have been someone else, but I definitely covered this story because at the time I thought it was absolutely ridiculous the way they were handling the situation. And I want to say it sucks because I was genuinely impressed with both of my Cheaty printers. These issues are quality control issues using cheaper parts and not thoroughly testing them. Cheaty, when you banned me after comments, you told us that safety isn't your priority. So I say this with the zero respect me and my family owe you. Well, we can't read that here on live national TV. Cheaty seems like a company, at least in my opinion, that doesn't take safety as seriously as they should. I brought up issues previously about how they wired up one of their chamber heaters, and there's enough room for you to actually put your finger into it and get electrically shocked and possibly electrocuted by exposed metal pieces of the radiator for the chamber heater. And even when the machine is set to an off position, depending on how your house is wired up, it might still be energized with 230 volts even with the power switch turned off on the back, just being plugged into the wall. So if those heatsink fins are electrified and energized just by plugging it in, all it takes for you is to touch it to potentially be electrocuted. And I thought that was completely irresponsible. There was a lot of people online that were defending their behavior, saying that, oh yeah, well, who's ever going to stick something in there and get shocked? Like, of course you wouldn't want to do that. But if you're taking your spring steel sheet and sticking it in the bed, you might accidentally poke it in there. If you've got a scraping tool and you accidentally slip and touch the chamber heater, you could, again, get electrocuted. So, like, it just shows a total lack of responsibility and accountability for mistakes that they've made in their engineering. And with this guy saying that the printer burned down his house, I can't say it surprises me. I mean, a lot of people put more trust in their 3D printer than they really should. I wish I could see like the charred remains of a 2D printer in here, but I can't really see anything. So we're going to have to chalk this up as an alleged fire that was started by the 2D printer. I mean, he does have a toaster over here on the wall, so maybe that was the culprit. It raises the question, why would this guy lie about that? And also, is there any legal recourse if your Chinese-made 3D printer burns your house down? There probably is, especially if the fire was caused by that company's negligence, then sure. But they might also say that, hey, you should have been watching your 3D printer and making sure it doesn't catch on fire. But some easy, safe, practical tips you can do to keep yourself safe. 1. Install a fire detector above your 3D printer. That way if there's any smoke or fire, you'll get an alarm and you'll be able to go extinguish the fire if there's an issue. 2. I always have a fire extinguisher next to my 3D printer. You can pick one up on Amazon. You can pick one up at a hardware store. I would actually recommend the hardware store option like Home Depot or something. And the last thing you can do is to make sure there's no flammable materials by your 3D printer. This is a common warning that's listed on space heaters because those consume a lot of power, and if they start to spark or shoot out flames, if there's nothing around it to catch on fire, then it should just resolve itself. With a 3D printer, if you have it up against a wall or like next to a bunch of pillows or couches or something, then that fire could easily spread and, engulf your entire house. So you want to avoid stuff like that. Another culprit is curtains. So if you're putting a 3D printer up against a wall near a window, make sure there's no curtains right next to it. Just like really common sense stuff. Keep any flammable stuff clear of your 3D printers, and always, always, always make sure you know what's going on with your printer. Don't just start it and leave it alone overnight. That's really irresponsible to do. Anytime I'm running longer prints, I plan my day out around it. It's like, okay, I'm going to start the print now, and then I have stuff to work on, and I'll be a room away in case anything goes wrong. I've got my fire alarm. I'm paying attention and making sure that nothing catastrophic happens. And I know it might be tempting if you're running larger prints to run it overnight, but I would only really recommend doing that if you have like a garage space where it's completely devoid of any flammable materials, and you have like a good 3 feet between the printer and anything else in your garage. Either have it on a concrete floor or on some steel shelving in a brick building. Just like make sure you're not gonna have things catch on fire. Because you don't want your home to look like this. No offense to the guy who originally posted this picture, but I would not want to live in this kind of a situation. And I'd really like to follow up and verify that the fire was indeed caused by his 3D printer. Some kind of report from the fire department or something just to verify, because, a lot of things can start fires and it's easy to blame the 3D printer. According to him, he saw flames pouring out of the printer. That's a pretty open and shut case if that's what actually happened. All right, let's get back to the remaining stories of the day because we got some other interesting stuff to talk about.
This is the first time I've had to break it up into 2 segments just because there's so much going on in the 3D printing industry, and I've got some really fun stuff that I want to share with you. First off, I did some user polls asking people what they thought about Bambu Lab, Creality, and PRUSA, because those are like the 3 biggest 3D printing companies that I'm aware of, and what people think about how reliable their printers are. Also, we're going to talk about how Bambu Lab is doubling down on their 3D printed Dunce cap. This is the helmet that they featured in their launch video when they were kind of talking about all the cool stuff the H2D can do. They've actually done some testing with it, actually checking to see if it passes those standards that I was talking about in the previous video for safety and impact absorption. But they also include this big fat disclaimer Then we're going to be talking about Bambu Lab and their import-export activity, trying to get a sense of how many printers they're selling. And we'll briefly talk about their investors, as well as the financial situation of other companies like Creality and PRUSA. So without further ado, let's get into the first story, the user polls that I conducted. So here you can see the highlighted answers that I put for all of these. But let's start out with the first question. So I get a lot of people in the comments talking about how unreliable the K2 Plus is. I got one and it's been working reliably for me. So this survey kind of serves as a way to collect some extra data points. So when we add the first two options together, it looks like 13% of the poll respondents own a K2 Plus. And about 2/3 of them think that it's a reliable machine, and 1/3 thinks that it's not reliable. Compared to the poll respondents who don't own a K2 Plus but want to share their opinion, a majority of them think that it's an unreliable machine. So this kind of reflects the feelings that I have about the machine. I mean, it's not a completely bulletproof machine, but I've printed for hundreds of hours with it and had very minimal issues. So overall, I do think it is a very reliable machine. However, people who don't have the machine are kind of judging it based on their previous experience with Creality printers. Maybe they had an old Ender 3 V2 and that didn't work very reliably, so they just think that the K2 Plus isn't going to be very reliable. Or they've watched videos from people like Uncle Jesse where he was having a couple issues with his machine, couldn't get it fixed. That happens with half the machines that I get in for review, so it's not uncommon to see those issues pop up. But I think the difference between ownership and public perception is kind of visible here. People who actually own the machine think it's generally reliable. People who don't own the machine are kind of split, leaning a little bit more towards the idea that it's an unreliable machine. I gotta say, this machine is quite a bit different than other machines that I've tried from Creality, and it is quite reliable. It's a pretty expensive machine, and personally, I wouldn't spend that much on a 3D printer, but I got it for free from Creality, so I'm not gonna complain. Alright, so the next company that I asked about was Bambu Lab Fanboys. So I wanted to know, you Bambu Lab owners out there, do you think the machine is reliable, or is it not reliable? And here we see an overwhelming response saying that their machine is reliable. I don't know if I'm getting spammed from Bambu Lab bots. This is just an open poll and anyone can answer. And that goes for any of the answers that I provide in this surveying that I did. Anyone could share the link and spam upvotes on any of these answers. But in general, most Bambu Lab owners say that their machine is reliable, and only a small minority say that the machine is unreliable. Then we see the same trend amongst non-owners of the Bambu Lab printers that we saw in the case with the Creality poll, in that people who don't own the machine are more likely to think that it's a little bit less reliable. But in general, most people think that they are reliable machines. And then when we ask the same question to PRUSA owners, we see that in general, most people who own a PRUSA think that it's reliable, and most people who don't own a PRUSA also think that it's reliable. But it's kind of interesting that the trend here is reversed, where the non-owners of the machine are more likely to think that the machine is reliable than the owners of the machine. I have machines from all three of these brands, and I believe that all of them are reliable. However, the only printers that I would say aren't reliable were my older Creality machines before they kind of reinvented themselves. And even the K1 series had kind of some issues with reliability. But everything they've come out in the past 1.5 or 2 years has been quite reliable in my experience. I did a secondary poll for Bambu Lab about, does anyone actually care about the TOS updates that Bambu Lab put out, where they're basically restricting access to third-party apps and electronics and upgrades, where they're basically controlling who has access to the Bambu Lab ecosystem in terms of, is Orca Slicer allowed, is the Panda Touch upgrade allowed. So, Bambu Lab pushed the security update and changed the terms of service, saying that, hey, if you want to use our printers in the way that we intend them to be used, then you can't be adding this other stuff to it. And then they pushed a firmware update that actually broke compatibility with some things that their users actually really enjoyed using. And we see this trend in a lot of companies, which we'll talk about later when we're discussing the Bambu Lab ecosystem and their monetization schemes. Companies like Deere, John Deere Tractors is a really popular example, Tesla, and for that case, most auto manufacturers, where they're kind of restricting access to the tools that you need to troubleshoot and repair your own property, restricting your ability to put third-party parts and modifications into your machines. Stratasys is another example. You need to get the service contract along with the machine so that you have that repeated revenue source where you're continuing to pay Stratasys even after you've bought your printer from them. And what's worrying to me is that Bambu Lab isn't like fully open sourcing everything and allowing you to make whatever changes you want to the firmware, which kind of hints that they might be keeping an ace up their sleeve. To me, kind of seems like they want to keep that as an option possibly in the future if they want to sell the company, or if they're in severe financial straits where they need to make money somehow or increase their profit margins. They could, in theory, impose some kind of subscription fee or something to use their products, or like lock down the hardware and not let you install the things that you want to install into the machine. So I'm generally distrustworthy of companies that lock their hardware down like that. PRUSA and Creality are much more open source friendly and much more friendly in the terms of like right to repair, where you can change the firmware that's loaded onto your machine and really modify it to however you see fit, since it's your property, it's your printer, you own it, and you get to run it the way that you want to. Bambu Lab is much more of a closed ecosystem, so that's just something you need to consider when you're making your purchasing decisions in what you want in a 3D printer. For some people, it doesn't really matter, but in terms of my audience, it sounds like a majority of people are upset with Bambu Lab and they wouldn't consider buying another product from them because of this issue with the privacy policy. But I'm not sure if Bambu Lab even cares. I think most of the people in the 3D printing community have already bought some printers. They're not really their biggest target audience anymore. I think they want to expand into bigger audiences that might not care so much about this stuff. So 62% of people who took this survey are saying that they won't buy another Bambu Lab because of it. 19% of people are saying that they don't like it, but they'll buy a Bambu Lab anyways. This is the kind of person that thinks, you know what, the printer works great, it's pretty affordable, it does what I need it to do. So if they have a weird privacy policy, sure, I don't like it. And then there's a strange minority of people who are like, yes, I want a lockdown ecosystem. Closed source is better. Which, there is some merit to that, because since Bambu Lab is able to have everything connected to the cloud and have their app, it means really tight integration, and it also means that you're not allowed to mess things up. So that might end up giving some people who are worried about ruining their printer a more secure experience, with less worry about accidentally breaking their machine, because they're not given the freedom to mess it up. Also, with that cloud connectivity, that means that Bambu Lab is able to collect a bunch of data on how people are using the machines and how they're failing in practice. So that feeds back into their engineering improvement loop, where they're able to make very reliable machines because of the data that they're gathering from their closed ecosystem. And then there's 17% of people who are like, you know what, I don't care if someone steals my Benchy files, they can have it. Then I have a couple bonus surveys. Now I'm putting out some speculation. I'm wondering if the PRUSA CoreXL is going to be a thing in the near future. The PRUSA XL came out a little while ago. It's the tool changer from PRUSA. I'm wondering what would happen if they put the Core 1 style enclosure around that thing, and that allowed it to reach higher accelerations because you've got a stiffer frame, but allowed you to do multicolor and multi-tool type things. And I think it would be pretty inexpensive for PRUSA to produce a product like that, simply because they've already done the research and development to make the XL. They already have all the research and development that they put into the Core 1. So just merging those two technologies into a large format, high-speed, multi-tool 3D printer that's capable of tool changing and doing multicolor prints with very little material waste and being able to do large models, I think that would make a pretty compelling product. And with the Core 1, when they launched that, they didn't increase the price that much compared to the MK4S. So if they were to hypothetically launch a CoreXL, if they maintained the same price as the PRUSA XL, then I think that would be quite a compelling product, and it would actually be pretty competitive in the current landscape of 3D printers. Okay, next up, I want to talk about the Cloud Shield. This was the helmet that was featured in the Bambu Lab advertisements about, look, you can 3D print a helmet and cut out these reflective strips and everything, and use the multi-material capabilities to make usable products, which is a really cool idea in theory. But I was pointing out that, hey, this is kind of an irresponsible idea to push to people, because if they don't print it correctly, or if the printer has some kind of malfunction, or if you've got a bad batch of material that has really poor layer adhesion, then you could end up with a situation where someone's manufactured their own helmet that won't protect them at all in the event of a crash. This helmet was developed by a designer on MakerWorld named Cloudberry, who came out with these really cool shoes. I was looking at the design portfolio, and it's actually pretty impressive. Look at these shoes. They designed it so it uses a bunch of different infill options to produce like a shoe that's nice and flexible but durable. I'd really be interested in trying these out. In my experience, my 3D printed shoes broke down over the course of a couple of weeks of just wearing them outside. This one, it says that you should be able to wear it outside, inside, and all that kind of stuff. So I'd be interested in printing one of these out and doing a durability test. That might be an idea for a future video, so let me know in the comments if you want to see that. But let's get back to the helmet. So this very talented designer came up with a helmet that uses TPU on the inside and a PCCF outer shell. Now, I don't like the idea of using a carbon fiber reinforced filament for anything that you're going to be wearing for an extended period of time, or anything you're going to be touching with your hands on a regular basis, because this carbon fiber reinforced filament tends to shed those microscopic carbon fibers into your skin. They can get in your eyes, they can get in your mouth, they can get in your wherever. So you should really be careful of where you're using this stuff. I think it's great for structural applications where you need the stiffness, but for things that you regularly touch, that's just going to shed fibers into your skin and your clothes and stuff. So it's just something that I would avoid. I wouldn't agree with their choice of recommended material, this PTGCF. You know, those carbon fibers shed, and I have a previous video about this topic where I show you microscopically what's going on inside of your skin when you handle these carbon fiber reinforced parts. But anyways, they actually did a little bit of due diligence with this product and had it tested in a testing lab, and it passed the Chinese version of I think a motorcycle helmet test. Basically, they're showing that it was within the threshold of under 300 Gs of impact acceleration. So they drop the helmet on something. So they drop something on the helmet, or they load it up with an artificial head and drop it on the ground from a fixed height and speed, and they measure the G-forces that you'll see if you were wearing this helmet in an accident like that. So it passed that threshold. However, there's slightly different regulations in different countries. There's actually a lab in Virginia Tech that does testing on a lot of these helmets, and I would recommend Bambu Lab send one of these helmets to them to see what they think about it, because then they can run the applicable tests in the US, and I think that would carry a little bit more weight with people who are concerned about the safety of something like this. And I looked at some of the test results. I was reading through some papers that published some numbers, and it looked like most of the helmets that were testing and performing well in the tests were showing about 100 to 120 Gs, so about half the G-forces that this cloud shield was showing, but it was done with a test with a slightly lower impact speed. So it's not an apples to apples comparison, so you really need to do testing to figure this stuff out. So I'd imagine this helmet would perform a little bit worse than a typical bicycle helmet that you'd buy commercially, but it's in the same realm of performance. So, you know, crash safety is one of those things that can be designed into a 3D printable file. However, they slapped this fat disclaimer on here in bright red text. The bicycle helmet has undergone and passed certain tests, but basically they're saying printing this helmet is at your own personal risk. The testing report is only applicable to helmets printed with the correct filaments and under perfect printing conditions. So if you were to print this helmet out and you fall and hurt your head and get permanent brain damage, you can't sue Bambu Lab, because they could easily say you didn't print it under perfect conditions or you didn't use the right filament. I wouldn't recommend people print this out, but from now on I'm just going to call this the Bambu Lab Fanboy Dunce cap. If I see anyone wearing one of these, I think they're being a little bit silly. But, you know, it's up to you if that's what you want to do. Print one of these out and wear it around. I'm not going to recommend it, but, you know, the file's here. There's also all sorts of other stuff that you can find on MakerWorld that I kind of personally disagree with making publicly available on a platform designed to, you know, have kids playing with these machines. But what do I know? Anyways, let's move on to the next thing. I want to talk about the community response to this new printer from Bambu Lab. I was reading through the comments on one of the most viewed review videos on the Bambu Lab H2D. This video was from CNC Kitchen. I think he did a great job. I'd really recommend giving this video a watch if you're at all interested in this machine. CNC Kitchen reviews are some of the best in the business, and I feel sorry for anyone who's reviewing machines at the same time as him, because he just takes the whole pie. You know, we think about the affiliate pie as like something we all share. CNC Kitchen has got this on lockdown. 500,000 views so far. Good job, Stefan. I just want to read through the comments on this video because I was just laughing the whole time reading through these comments. He's saying, what questions can I ask Bambu Lab and Dr. Tao about the H2D? Please leave them here. The first question is, What happened to not being evil, huh? I have a big one. Why should I ever trust them again after their software shenanigans? Will I need a WeChat account in the future? Will I need a social score over 800 to use the 40-watt laser? Will I be able to use off-brand filaments? Nah, not falling again for future promises. Why did they make their firmware change, and when will they undo it? I have an X1C with AMS and will never buy another Bambu. I have seen little about actual laser safety about this printer, so I'm not quite sure how and what accidental safety features are implemented in this machine. The door, for example, looks like the laser light can leak out the seams, and it should be optimally shut off as soon as the door is even slightly opened. Is that the case? It does look like that's what happened in when other people tested this. You open the door and it shuts off. I mean, Bambu Lab is a pretty big company filled with pretty smart engineers, so I would assume that they've done their due diligence and have tried to follow the rules as they're written. Can the laser be used to heat up pre-deposited layers in pure FDM printing to increase layer adhesion? I'm not sure about this because from what it looks like, you print with the machine, and then when you want to use the laser, you open it up, install the laser attachment, and then start lasering. It seems like it's one or the other, not a mixed capability. However, in a future firmware update, they might enable both to be active at the same time. But even still, I don't think this is a great idea. I actually had this idea a while ago when I got a laser in for review. And I was like, well, what if I just lasered some FDM printed parts? What would happen? What ended up happening most of the time is either nothing or burning and smoking. It's really hard to hit the sweet spot of just barely melting it. It requires a lot of tuning and probably closed loop feedback with a thermal camera or something like that. I don't see this being a thing that is going to happen. So yeah, I wouldn't hold my breath on enhancing 3D printing with lasers, because when you laser a lot of the common materials that we 3D print with, they emit toxic gases. So yeah, just stick to laser safe materials with the laser cutter, and then when you want to do 3D printing, just use the 3D printer portion of the H2D. One of the top comments is saying, instead of a laser engraver, I would have preferred a 3D scanner. Maybe that's something that you can add in the future. Another commenter says, as someone who's been in the laser business for years, integrating a laser into a 3D printer is one of the least practical ideas I've seen. 3D printing demands a clean, dust-free environment for consistent results. A lot of people want to see CNC Kitchen cut open their high-flow nozzle to see how it works. I feel like a lot of upgrades here that are not already available on other printers are mostly a novelty. I kind of feel the same way. I mean, they could have just launched this as a 3D printer and maybe launched the laser stuff later. They could have just said, hey, we're promising to add new tools to this in the future. Here's the 3D printer. Because what I saw, I mean, my personal impression is like, wow, this machine's expensive, because I'm looking at that $3,500 MSRP of that full laser combo. I think it would have made more sense to just, focus on the 3D printer, because your audience is 3D printer people. This person saying, it turns out I didn't cancel my PRUSA Core 1 after watching this. It's kind of a funny take. One thing that baffles me is that you have an AMS with 4 spools, a head with 2 extruders, and no way to feed 2 filaments from the AMS. WTF. So yeah, that is kind of a funny thing about the way that this machine is set up. Basically, the intended use case is you have one nozzle that's feeding a single spool of material off to the side, and then you have the second nozzle that is feeding the AMS filaments. So you get basically 1 plus 4 with the way that it's set up, instead of a true access to all 5 colors at the same time type of thing. Now, Bambu Lab did file a patent for a switching device that would allow them to alternate which nozzle is being fed the material from which slot on the AMS port, but that just ended up being too expensive or complex, so they scrapped it. It could be a feature they're launching in the future, but for now, that's something that we're not going to see on this machine. Also, I thought it was a pretty weird workflow where you slice your part, and then the slicer tells you how to rearrange the spools to get optimal printing and the least waste, because you're basically selecting which spool is going to be on the primary nozzle, and then all your other colors will be on the AMS nozzle. So before you start your print job, you have to pause everything, take the spool out, rearrange them, and swap it so that it knows where each color is. And it seems a little silly to me. It's not the best workflow, and from Bambu Lab, I kind of expected more from them. I mean, at the end of the day, you do get the capabilities. It's just more finicky than I thought it would be. Also, there's a special port in the back of the machine that you have to unplug and then feed your TPU through it to get TPU to print properly, because apparently feeding TPU through the AMS isn't great, especially when you're dealing with more flexible forms of TPU. So just a lot of really weird and kind of hacky stuff from Bambu Lab compared to their previous launches, which have been very well polished. Also, I noticed that a lot of people have been having issues with the TPU. I think what that comes down to is the fact that they have two kind of different extruder feed mechanisms. Also, the way they have this set up is a little bit weird and, in my opinion, non-optimal. When you look at a typical 3D printer, you've got dual drive gears, so you're feeding the filament by squeezing it from both sides and forcing it through the hot end. On this machine, they have a central drive gear, which reverses direction based on which side they're trying to feed. And then they have an idler which pushes up against it, which I believe this is a passive idler and it isn't a driven wheel. So that's going to possibly reduce the performance of the extruder a little bit. Also, since you need to have this mechanism that allows it to select which extruder arm is active, you might need more clearance around the filament path. So that could result in poorer performance with flexibles, because you've basically just got extra clearance when you're extruding the filament, and it might work its way out one way or another. Another thing I found interesting is, compared to the LGX extruder, which is like Bondtech's latest extruder, it's got two large drive gears, but this one is using an asymmetric setup where you've got a large drive gear and then a small idler that's helping feed your filament, which might result in some less than ideal extrusion. And when we compare it to the extruder that PRUSA machines use, the Nextruder, it's using a large drive gear and two idlers. So basically that just helps enhance the amount of grip that you get and reduces slippage when you're driving filament through the system. So, you know, we've got a bunch of different solutions from all these different companies. It's interesting to see the variety. I don't think 3D printing is a solved problem at this point in time because we're seeing all these different solutions. In terms of motion systems, it seems like CoreXY is really taking over. Most new machines nowadays are CoreXY because it's inexpensive to build, it's really fast at printing, but we're still debating what the best extruder setup is. All right, next up, let's talk about Bambu Lab's import activity and how their sales are doing. So this is from a website called Import Yeti. You can see all sorts of information about how much each company is importing or exporting, because basically when you import something, you have to file a bunch of paperwork to deal with the tariffs and the import fees and duties and all that kind of stuff. So that's publicly available, and there's some sites and services like Import Yeti that will gather all this information and compile it into reports, so you can see how much companies are importing, where they're importing from, where they're exporting to. This is the kind of stuff that you deal with as a supply chain management person. But as we can see here, Shenzhen Tuzhou Technology, which is basically Bambu Lab for those of you who don't know, they had a huge increase in the number of imports into the US, but they had a peak and they've actually fallen off a little bit. So this graph ranges from basically the beginning of 2023 to the beginning of 2025. So we can think of these as kind of like quarterly reports. It looks like imports from Bambu Lab peaked about a year ago. They were importing tons of printers for those A1s, the A1 minis, the P1Ps, the P1S, the X1C. But in the year or so since then, they haven't been launching any new products. So their imports have been kind of falling off and kind of drying up a little bit. This actually has me a little bit worried about Bambu Lab's long-term viability as a company and, you know, whether they're managing their growth responsibly. If they grow the company too large and they have too much overhead, then when their revenue retracts a little bit, they're going to have a hard time keeping the lights on in the company. So hopefully they're managing everything properly and we'll see Bambu Lab sticking around for years to come. But you can see their imports are dropping off. Who knows, maybe next quarter we'll see a huge spike due to the H2D sales. If those printers sell well, then you know, that'll really help Bambu Lab out with their financials. But if the H2D ends up being a flop, this could be a big problem for Bambu Lab because, you know, they don't launch new products all that often. It looks like the latest data from the report here is actually, you know, showing about similar import levels as the company had 2 years ago, which was when they basically only had the X1C and the P1P. Now, another thing you need to know about Bambu Lab is they have investors. That's one of the ways they were able to scale up so quickly. I mean, they basically went from nothing to an enormous 3D printer company rivaling the top 10 manufacturers of 3D printers in the world. So that's really impressive growth. And a lot of that growth, I think, was fueled by venture capital. Now, a lot of you might think, oh, didn't they have a Kickstarter? Weren't they a little company back then? No, I don't think that's the case. I think they had significant investments before they launched the X1C. You know, they raised a couple $1 million on Kickstarter, but even before that, they had produced hundreds of prototypes to validate the machines. They invested in tooling to produce the X1C, which has to be millions of dollars of tooling and months and months of, if not years, of design work. So I fully believe that Bambu Lab was a company that hired hundreds of engineers before the Kickstarter, and they had hundreds of prototypes, did all the software testing. They leveraged a ton of open source IP. You know, they took the slicer from PRUSA slicer, they took a lot of the ideas from Clipper and Voron and some other open source projects and made it into a nice little commercially available package, which required a lot of work and a lot of engineering. So yeah, I'm thinking this company probably had about 500 employees by the time they launched their Kickstarter, and they had millions, if not tens of millions, of funding before that, before they were able to launch the X1C. Also, I had rumors that there's a little bit of corporate espionage, that Bambu Lab may have gotten some inspiration from the way Creality was running things, you know, sneaking in there and seeing how they're working, checking out their latest prototypes and taking some of those ideas and using it to form their product line. But these are just rumors, you know. I don't know what to believe anymore. You can do your own research on these companies. The one that I've seen come up the most in the news is IDG Capital. And if we go to the IDG Capital website, they're invested in a ton of companies, especially big companies in China, like Bilibili. That's essentially the YouTube clone in China. We've got Anchor Innovations. They sell probably hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars of wireless chargers and battery banks and USB-C accessories. We've got Bambu Lab here. We've got Shein, which is a fast fashion brand. I think this is Xiaomi. I don't know all of these companies, but these are all really big companies. Oh, iQIYI. This is a company that is basically like Chinese Netflix, and you can watch your Korean dramas on it. I actually have a subscription to iQIYI, so my fiance can watch her Korean and Chinese dramas. Oh, Insta360, IGG, they make a bunch of mobile games, you know, those addictive games that are basically gambling for children. We've got a lot of big companies here, but notably we have a couple familiar companies, Anycubic and Bambu Lab. Now, Bambu Lab, I think, has a much better reputation than Anycubic, but, you know, if they're investing in both of these companies, maybe they want to hedge their bets. And as of late, Anycubic has really been stepping up their game. Let's take a look at this. Anyone who's familiar with Anycubic knows that their latest products seem much more advanced than the stuff that they were releasing 2 or 3 years ago. This was the kind of stuff that they were coming out with 2 years ago. Basically looks like an Ender 3. But now they're making much more refined products, and their most recent launch is the S1 Combo, which is basically a low-cost X1C clone. You know, it's got the multicolor printing setup. It's got the nice touch screen. I'll probably take a look at one of these at a trade show next time I see one. 44 decibel ultra quiet printing. I have a hard time believing that, but you know, maybe if I get one in for review, I'll be able to validate that claim. Oh, and printing and drying at the same time. No way. Anycubic already came up with this before Bambu Lab did. Oh, we have a fans only bonus, not to be confused with an only fans bonus. I have a hard time believing IDG Capital is going to be getting involved with a company unless they're pouring millions into it and really trying to scale it into a massive corporation. With that money comes some obligations to your shareholders or your investors. So for instance, if Bambu Lab pitched, you know, a continuous growth path, let's say right on this green bar is when they talk to IDG and they're like, hey, listen, we got this great idea. We're exporting millions, billions of dollars of printers. We've got a unlimited money printer. We just need your investment. Then they invest, then their sales drop off. That could be an issue for them. I don't think Bambu Lab's going anywhere. They're big enough. They have enough sales to kind of see themselves through hard times like this. I was looking at another, you know, venture capital funding website that was talking about how Bambu Lab describes themselves. They describe themselves as like an AI company. So, you know, if you're looking for venture capital, it's a common joke that you just add AI to it and then you'll be able to get a bunch of money. When you compare Bambu Lab's growth over the years to Creality or PRUSA, it kind of paints a different picture because, oh, sorry, this is another joke. Sorry. Here's a meme from Facebook. This is the H2D, which is coming after the H2D. And as you can see, they've added every possible tool to this thing. And I don't know, is this what the venture capital investors want to see? Do they want to see them growing into doing more of the laser market and doing more multifunctional stuff? It might be that the only way that Bambu Lab can maintain that growth trajectory that we were seeing in this imports chart is to branch out and try other things. So we see them coming out with the CyberBrick thing, which is kind of like an Arduino, which is kind of made more user-friendly and condensed into discrete blocks. So it's like Arduino plus Lego is how I would describe it. This is complicated stuff. The 3D printer business isn't just about selling 3D printers, so all of these strange decisions by Bambu Lab might be in service of a larger or longer term goal, where they're going to be placing more emphasis on selling consumables, accessories, and laser cutter goods, whatever else they branch into. But even on the Maker World website, you've got the Maker Lab thing where you can just upload files and have them make 3D printable products for you. So in this case, you just give it a 2D picture and then it makes a bust. In this case, you give it a 2D picture and it turns it into a lithopane. And I don't know, are they trying to cut HueForge out of their ecosystem? I don't know if they're working with HueForge on this or if they're developing their own thing. Like what Bambu Lab has been doing is just kind of conglomerating everything and grabbing features from here and there and products and just kind of mashing it all into their ecosystem. It's pretty interesting what they're doing. I'd describe this as more of a service-based thing where you're giving your users a service who are in the ecosystem rather than just selling them hardware. Because hardware, if they make it well and it's reliable, like a lot of the Bambu Lab stuff has been, then you're not going to need to sell another one in a year from now. I mean, maybe there was some wisdom in Creality making crappy Ender 3s for the 5 or so years before they started making good products, because then they could just sell you another Ender 3 every year. Then you get into these ideas of designed obsolescence and finding ways to maintain profitability over a long period of time. I mean, let's say you're trying to sell your company, your Bambu Lab, you're trying to sell the company or get investors. You have a certain valuation of the company that is going to be much higher if you have a continuous revenue stream. Because when you're selling hardware, you're one bad launch away or one extremely good competitor away from going out of business. Because if your product is bad and it doesn't sell, your income drops to zero, you lose profitability, and then, your company just crashes and burns. So I do see it as an important thing for a company that's trying to grow and become as large as Bambu Lab to have recurring revenue streams. And that's one of the things that makes me nervous about these locked down hardware and firmware decisions that they're making, because that could leave the door open for disabling features unless you pay subscriptions or only allowing you to use certain consumables in their products. So that's not something that's happening now, but by leaving the door closed on their firmware, they're keeping that ace up their sleeve essentially, where they could do that to boost their profitability in the long run. So yeah, the H2D might be a thing in the future. I couldn't find any publicly available information about Creality's investors. They grew from a small company into what they are now, so it's a more organic growth process than what we saw from Bambu Lab, where they just exploded out of nowhere. Same with PRUSA. PRUSA has acquired a couple of companies over the years. I think Creality has also acquired a company or two here or there, and I'm not sure what their funding structure looks like. The only publicly available information I could find about Creality is when they did the CR6, which they ran a Kickstarter on and raised some $4 million. PRUSA, it seems to be just like a slow and steady growth from them. I found something interesting looking at this website that shows the timeline of their whole story, and I saw this picture of the dog. And boy, is that a cute dog, but you know what it made me think about? It made me think, where have I seen this before? Yes, Bambu Lab. When they were founding their company, they were like, we need an animal mascot because, we're copying PRUSA's slicer, we're copying their business model. So we also need to copy putting an animal mascot on our company page because, that's not weird at all. And I'm a little concerned about this cat. Apparently this is Spaghetti the cat. I haven't seen any updates about Spaghetti the cat. Hopefully Spaghetti the cat is doing all right. Some last things I want to talk about with the H2D before I move on is the laser cleaning. Apparently if you use the laser module, this thing gets filthy. This thing looks like it just survived being on the Martian surface. Apparently these pictures were taken from the Bambu Lab wiki. So this machine was run for 40 hours continuous
which is actually quite a bit of laser usage. A typical laser job is rarely more than an hour. I mean, most often it's like 10 to 20 minutes. But if you don't clean this thing and let the smoke residue build up in the machine, everything ends up getting coated in this nasty looking smoke residue. You can see all of it here, all this grayish, brownish stuff. So if you do decide to get the laser module, just keep in mind you're going to have to do regular cleanings to make sure that this thing stays in good condition. And this was just with the 10 watt laser module. Imagine how much smoke you could generate with the 40 watt laser module. So just doing an inverse ratio here, I would imagine that after 10 hours of using the 40 watt laser module, you would get a roughly similar amount of smoke buildup. So just keep that in mind if you're planning on using the laser. Also, there's materials that you're definitely not going to want to cut in there. But if the laser stuff concerns you at all, you always have the option of just not buying it or picking it up later if you decide you want to upgrade the machine further on down the line. Here's a little video here. It looks like they do an inspection after 3 hours of laser usage. I think this is them kind of doing some damage control, like, oh man, those pictures that went out kind of made it look dirtier than it actually is. Now this is with basswood. I imagine if you're cutting other materials like acrylic, then you could have different types of residue building up, and you know, this test was just with the plywood. So it could be better or worse with other materials. Now, some other stuff I was looking at is whenever Bambu Lab launches their new machines, they also give you all the documentation to be able to see how these machines are taken apart and put together. So that's really useful for doing your maintenance. You're guided through the entire thing. I always like to take a look at these and just see how much of a pain it looks like to take one of these apart. You can see they're using all these tiny ribbon connectors. This is quite a long article, and I think this is for replacing the servo motor. You have to take everything apart and get down to that motor and swap it out. And if we look at this, you know, this is the continued instructions basically. If you want to keep putting this together, the rest of the instructions are on this page. So you can see here they're using a lot of these ribbon cables, which I really hate dealing with, because it's hard to tell if they're seated correctly. But I think, you know, if you really needed to service this, you'd be able to do it. It's just one of those things that's a little finicky to deal with. So hopefully you're not going to have to take this apart very often, if at all. Another thing that complicates assembly and disassembly a little bit is that you have both of these spring-loaded filament cutter arms that you have to deal with while you're putting things together. And you can see there's all these little ribbon cables. I hate dealing with them. So yeah, I mean, just look at this. Like, what is this? Little ribbon cable that you have to tuck in over here. There's just all these little steps for taking this stuff apart and putting it back together. So it's a lot of work to maintain and do repairs on a machine like this just because of the added complexity. Let's take a look at this. This is something I'm actually really interested in, is the way they have these hot ends set up. Basically, they've got the hot ends bolted to these little ceramic plates, and then those are bolted to something else. So basically, if the nozzle or print head collides with anything, it's got a rigid mechanical link to the tool head. This is rigidly connected to the tool head, the hot end part of it. And then you have the thin-walled tube and the heat sink here. And you never have to worry about that thin-walled tube getting bent, because any large loads are going to be introduced into the print head down here, which, you know, thanks to that structural joint that we saw in this picture, that's just like a really solid contact, so you don't have to worry about that breaking or bending or snapping. And then you never really end up in a situation where the heatsink gets bumped into. So I think that's a really good setup because it's going to be nice and strong. There's a lot of clever stuff about the way that Bambu Lab set their printer up. So there is a lot of cost and complexity with the system. Also, if we look at the H2D Spare Parts, it looks like they have the whole store stocked with all of this stuff. So we can see power supplies, cameras, basically every part that you would need to replace is listed here. Even the back panel, like, wow, this is pretty comprehensive. What I'm interested in is the extruder and hot end modules, so I'll sort from high to low. Yeah, that's probably one of the most expensive parts because of all the complexity there. So if we look at the dual drive unit, it looks like this contains the extruder as well as the servo motor and the two filament cutters. So if this got damaged somehow and you needed to replace all of this, this would be $180. The heated bed looks like is $180 as well. The touchscreen, if you break that off the front somehow, then you can just get a replacement for it. The power supply looks a bit expensive. So it looks like the power supply is 350 watts. So that's just like a typical power supply size for a 3D printer. The $120 price point is a bit expensive. I'm not sure why they're using something quite so expensive. If we look at something that's kind of been considered the gold standard of 3D printer power supplies, the good old Meanwell 350 watt 24 volt power supply, this is what powered all your Ender 3s. Something very similar is used on all the PRUSA printers. So they tend to be pretty inexpensive, $25, $30. The Bambu Lab one is quite a bit more expensive. I don't know if anyone knows about this Moso brand, if that's like a super premium power supply or something, but it looks like you're paying a little bit of a bamboo tax to get a replacement power supply. Maybe they've got a super quiet fan. Like if you're looking at making a power supply super premium, having a quiet fan and larger heat sinks inside of there will help the machine run more quietly. But I'm just speculating as to why this machine is so expensive and kind of giving them the benefit of the doubt that paying so much for a power supply, you'll get something exceptional in return. But $130 for a power supply like that is kind of unheard of. Ooh, the X-axis assembly, that looks pretty cool. Like, I'm curious if someone wants to build their own printer, if they just buy the X-axis and the dual extruder and make their own PCB and wire this thing up, if you can basically start building your own printers out of these Bambu Lab parts. Bambu Lab puts a lot of work into developing these pretty cool custom parts, and if people start building their own custom 3D printers with it, I think that'd be pretty sweet. If you were to upgrade all your panels to laser safety glass, it looks like it would be pretty expensive because, you know, we've got one panel, 90, another that's like about $100, about $350 altogether to get your laser safety glass installed all around. So that's kind of an expensive upgrade path, but if you're putting a laser on there, you're definitely going to want to have that laser safety glass just to make it a little bit safer. Ooh, a nozzle camera. Here's the XY motors. Looks like they've got a little bit of custom stuff on here as well. So yeah, I actually like this. You've got the standard stepper motor on the bottom, and then up top, it looks like this is a little bracket to support the other end of that bearing. That's something that I would really like to see more of is with these stepper motors, most printers only support one end of that pulley. You know, the end that's stuck in the motor is just sticking out, and then they wrap the belt around it. And any tension is going to put some bending load on that shaft, and that's going to add a little bit of flexibility to the system. In general, you want to support both ends of a shaft like this, and it'll end up just being a lot nicer and producing cleaner motion. So that's pretty neat to see. We've got one more bearing on there that might fail, but you know, that's not that big of a deal. All right, and then we've got the nozzle lifting rail. This is like a super tiny MGN rail. I just like looking at all this stuff. I guess this is some kind of metal piece that you bolt on there, and then you attach the hot end part to that. Here's the hot end heating assembly. Looks like this is sold out. Maybe they just haven't started selling them yet. But here's the left side and the right side. And look at this material. It's like a pretty light colored material. I think it's ceramic. If anyone's really into it, they might be able to extract these parts, buy them from the Bambu Lab store, and install them on their own printer. Or better yet, maybe someone can find Bambu Lab's supplier and get those on the third-party market and start selling them for people who want to mod their Ender 3s and whatnot. So yeah, I mean, you've got all of the replacement and spare parts you could ask for in the Bambu Lab store. If we look at Creality, I was noticing this when I was looking at the K2 website. When I was looking at this website earlier, they had all of the spare parts for the K2 kind of listed as like sub-options for this part of the store. I think Creality's still working on their store website layout. Let's see. Looks like they moved them to a different area, so let me check out the spare parts. Yeah, they don't have spare parts for the K2 Plus listed here. Earlier they were listed under the main product page for the K2 Plus. But yeah, Creality's still figuring out how to set up their website properly. Another way Creality is trying to copy Bambu Lab is they've got these wiki help articles. I mean, this looks pretty similar to what was set up for the Bambu Lab printers. Yeah, periodic maintenance tips. And just like the Bambu Lab wiki, all of the things listed here with pictures.
But you can see it's loading kind of slow. I think Creality is like not optimized this website sufficiently. So these are probably like really large images. If I open them in a new tab, let's see what this looks like. Yeah, that's like a relatively high resolution image. And it's just giving you this small little preview. So there's some website optimization that they could do here. Feels like I'm going back in the time to the days of 56K. The PRUSA XL has been out for a little while. It's like 3 or 4 years old at this point. I'm curious if they're working on a PRUSA XL2 that might have a full enclosure with the same design language as the Core 1. So you'd get the rigidity and the speed and keep the tool changer set up, put a big cap on the top, or maybe some other clever way of managing all the cables up here. I think PRUSA showed enough creativity with how they managed the cables on the Core 1 that I think they're probably capable of doing something a little bit cleaner than this. Or maybe they could switch over to using Bondtech's setup. That seems unlikely to me because PRUSA seems pretty invested in this kind of Hotend neck extruder setup that they've developed. If they were able to enclose this like a Core 1 XL, reuse a bunch of the XL parts, get the tool changer, even throw in a laser cutter just like Bambu Lab did, just to be able to do it. And since you'd have an enclosure, you could make it laser safe and all that. I wouldn't shame anyone for not being able to afford this type of printer. Like, all three of these, in my opinion, are just kind of wildly expensive. And I'm still a much bigger fan of these really inexpensive printers, like your Centauri Carbons that are extremely cheap, $300, or your Soval Zeros that are $400, or another good one is the A1 Mini. A couple of my other favorites include the Creality High. Print quality is good. You can upgrade it to multicolor if you want to. If we compare that to the Bambu Lab A1, it looks like they're targeting pretty much the same price point. Keep in mind with Creality, you tend to get free shipping. And with Bambu Lab, they usually make you pay shipping. It'd be $15, $30. I'm not sure exactly what it is. Once you factor that in, it's like $40 more expensive to get this Bambu Lab A1 compared to the Creality High. Creality High is a little bit larger. I think it's 260 millimeters build area. Yeah, 260 by 260 by 300. So it's a little bit bigger and taller. This machine is a little more expensive, but it's in the Bambu Lab ecosystem if you're into that. It says the max acceleration for this printer is 10,000 millimeters per second. So again, what Creality does is they basically look at the Bambu Lab printer and they're like, how can we outdo this a little bit? So they make a machine that's slightly cheaper and slightly higher specs to give you some options. Now, it's not going to be the same ecosystem as Bambu Lab, and that might be a pro or a con depending on who you are. But the nice thing is that you've got options. Printers these days are getting a little out of hand now with how much they're costing. I would really steer, especially beginners and stuff, into something that's a little bit cheaper like this, whether that's your Creality High or some kind of Bambu Lab A1 Mini or A1. There's no reason to jump right into the hobby and buy a $2,300 machine. Get something small like this, see if you like it first, and then if you can justify getting a larger machine or you've got a bunch of extra cash in hand, then treat yourself to something nice. Speaking of financially responsible decisions, this video has no sponsor, so if you like the work that I'm doing here, go ahead and donate to my Patreon or, help me out in some way. I spend hours researching and filming all this stuff and editing it together to give you guys the news, and it'd be nice if you enjoy what I'm doing, give me a thanks with some bucks on my Patreon. There's a few notable channels that were left out of the launch day celebrations for the H2D. Of course, there's my channel, but those of you who have been watching my channel for a while know that I have a long-standing beef with Bambu Lab. Also, the next layer didn't get one, but, after what happened with the A1 Mini, that's understandable. And there's a notable TikToker and X-poster, 3D Print General, who also didn't get one. But what really surprised me is that Uncle Jesse didn't participate in the launch day celebrations. Now, I don't know why this is. He does a lot of work with Elegoo, so maybe they viewed that as a conflict of interest. Or maybe he said something that was a little too critical of Bambu Lab. Let's take a look into his video history to see if he's done anything that could warrant removal. He has a rant about Bambu Lab dominating 3D printing. He also says Bambu Lab is perfecting what MakerBot started, and also he might not have praised the A1 or A1 Mini quite enough in his reviews. This was a while ago, but he said blazing fast but frustrating.
I'm not really sure what ticked off Bambu Lab and got Uncle Jesse on the naughty boys list with me. In any case, I've been following his saga on Twitter, and he has purchased his own H2D, so I'm sure he'll be able to make a video about it if you are curious what his thoughts are. This is an expert level conspiracy theory, so hang on and hear me out. So basically, what if Uncle Jesse provided Elegoo with the blueprints of the X1C, because I think he got an X1C early, if I'm correct. Yeah. So what if Uncle Jesse gave the original blueprints for the X1C to Elegoo, which allowed them to come out with the Centauri carbon so quickly? And this carbon is really, just the naming of it, it looks like they're trying to eat Bambu Lab's lunch here by calling it the carbon. That's pretty remarkably close branding compared to the X1 carbon. And they copied the spec sheet down to the last detail with this thing. Who decides to do a 256 by 256 by 256 build volume? It just doesn't make sense unless you're directly trying to copy the X1C. And I'm surprised that the X1C is still selling. I mean, Bambu Lab is, still shipping those units out supposedly, even though the MSRP is a little bit high for what it's offering these days. But that's just my opinion. And if anyone should be cutting Uncle Jesse off at this point, it's Creality, after what he did to his K2+. First he made a video about how it's not working. I guess he got a bad cable, so it's hard to blame him for that. But he turned the K1 Max into a meme by snapping and breaking the glass door, to the point where any printer that has a glass door now is kind of associated with Uncle Jesse. And I still wonder to this day if the Core 1 has only moved to using a plastic door because of the need to make it Uncle Jesse proof, to send it over to him to review. These are the questions that I ponder late at night. The last thing I want to talk about, and this really is the last thing, is the Bambu Lab affiliate program. No, I'm not here to whine yet again about how I was kicked out of the Bambu Lab affiliate program. I want to talk about something that I noticed with the launch dates of this new H2D printer. And I think I noticed them doing the same thing for the A1 launch and maybe even the previous launches before that. So hear me out. The Bambu Lab H2D officially launched on the 25th, so H2D launch. Okay, now stay with me here. All right, if we look at the Bambu Lab website right now for the H2D, it says you can't order it. It's all on back order right now. Now at the bottom here, it says available April 8th at 10 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Okay, we'll go to our calendar here. We're April 8th. H2D back in stock, as in it's available to order. So this is pretty interesting here. If we look at the number of days between the H2D launch, which was, March 25th, and when it comes back in stock, April 8th, let's see how many days that is. So it's roughly 14 to 15 days. Instead of just allowing people to place back orders for this machine, they're stopping people from being able to place orders. People have to wait 14 or 15 days or whatever to end up replacing their order. But the problem with this is that if you launched your video on the 25th and that convinced someone that they wanted to buy a printer, and then they come back on the 9th or the 10th or the 11th, after this comes back in stock, then your cookie will have stopped tracking, and when they make that purchase, it doesn't get credited to you. It might get credited to someone else, it might get credited to no one, but in any case, it's not for you. So if you do decide to repurchase the H2D, I would recommend that you go back to the content creator that you really wanted to attribute that sale to and click on their link so that you refresh that tracking cookie and they get paid out for it. Because what could happen is if you watched that video and initially wanted to buy the printer, a cookie got loaded onto your browser when you clicked that affiliate link, and then you go back to the website on one of these later days, whether you're just browsing directly to the website by typing in bambulab.com, or you click a banner ad or a pop-up link or like a mid-roll video on someone else's video, and you get back onto the website and complete that purchase, then this original guy isn't going to get the sale. So in my opinion, that's a little bit sus. I wonder if they're trying to strip people of affiliate income. Now, this wouldn't be the first time that Bambu Lab has stripped a person of their affiliate income. There's another thing that might be at play here, and that has to do with what happens when you cancel an order. Basically, if someone places an order and then that order stays on the books for a month or two until the production catches up and they can ship a printer, then the affiliate locking date might occur to the point where Bambu Lab now has to pay that content creator that affiliate income, and then if the original customer cancels their order, then they can't get that affiliate money back from the content creator. So it might also be a situation where they're waiting for the next shipment of H2Ds to get in. You know, they're shipping these in from China and unloading them in a port in LA or Texas or wherever. It might be a situation where they want to make sure that they fulfill the printer orders quickly so that they have time so that if someone returns their printer or cancels the order, then they can claw back that affiliate money, which technically they should be able to do that so that they're not ending up paying out for sales that aren't actually generated. Okay, so it's a wild world out there with affiliate tracking cookies, and hopefully that gave you a little bit of insight into what goes on there. Now, you're not going to have to worry about Bambu Lab advertisements on this channel. Initially, they kicked me out of their affiliate program with the statement that I don't match their brand identity and they didn't want me, like promoting or linking to their products. But they just so happened to run a large advertising campaign that ran a ton of ads on my channel, so it couldn't have been that big of an issue for them. There was a time before I was in the Bambu Lab affiliate program, I was hard on them. I got into the Bambu Lab affiliate program, I was still hard on them. And now that I'm kicked out of the Bambu Lab affiliate program, again, I'm still critical of them. So I try to stay an even keel, and to help Bambu Lab out, I blocked their ability to run ads on my channel by adding the bambulab.com URL to the blacklist of advertisers on my website. So this is a Bambu Lab advertisement free zone. You're welcome, you and the audience. Also, you're welcome, Bambu Lab, because I know you guys probably would have stopped running ads on my channel if you had the choice, wouldn't you? Let me know if you find these discussions about affiliate marketing interesting. Personally, I find it fascinating because that's been, one of my major sources of income over the last year. And just learning the ins and outs of the whole process is, it's kind of like seeing where the sausage is made. This is how we generate 3D printer sales. It's by building hype and pumping things up on websites and videos like this. I'm just genuinely really interested in 3D printing technology, and I was making videos about this stuff before any affiliate stuff was involved at all. And it's been a wild ride relying on that income, to say the least. But I got to give a huge thanks to anyone who supports me on Patreon. I mean, you guys are the real MVPs here and help keeping this channel going. So if you can support the channel and you appreciate all of these long-form content and deep dives in various topics related to 3D printing, engineering, and the affiliate business, go ahead and join my Patreon. There's a link in the description down below. And that's about all I have for this episode of 3D Printing News. Wow, I've been talking for a while here, so thank you guys for staying to the end. If you're really that interested in what I have to say, you guys are really awesome. Join the Discord and hit me up on there if you want to talk about buying or selling 3D printers, because I have a couple that I'm going to be getting rid of soon. I usually post all the ones I'm getting rid of before I'm about to move. Oh, one last thing. I'm working on a really cool printer that I can't tell you about, but it's really cool. And it's not exactly a 3D printer, but it's like 3D printer adjacent. Something like you've never seen before, and I'm going to be doing some fun stuff with it. So make sure to subscribe if you want to learn more about that. And I know I'm being super nebulous, but I am under NDA. And despite my reputation as a notorious leaker, I should have you know that I've never actually leaked anything. I've only reported on things that were already publicly available information. When I say I'm not going to tell someone about something, I keep my secrets. All right. Thanks for watching this episode, and I'm actually signing out for real this time, so I'll see you in the next episode.